If the de minimis comes down along with the tariffs going up, you got like this double whammy going from 0 to 100. Like we're talking a massive disruption.
It would be. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Decoding Cross-Border Ecommerce podcast. I'm your moderator today, Clint Reid, alongside with Aaron Bezzant, and here to talk about an extremely hot topic lately.
It is.
Tariffs. What are tariffs? That's the topic, and I cannot wait to absorb the knowledge that you have, Aaron, with tariffs, and this is going to be fun.
You know, when people talk about tariffs and the U.S. and Trump, the Chinese trade war always comes to mind.
Yeah.
Do you know how Trump feels about that Chinese trade war?
I've been hearing a lot, but I'd love to get your take on it.
He feels terrific. Okay. I do have one other thing to add here. I've always been a little jealous because you do these one-off shirts with all these movies that you love, right? That really 99% of the population has no idea what movie we're talking about because they're these sci-fi movies that, yeah. What do you have on?
Okay, let's give the audience a second to look at it.
Okay.
You know, all the fans. Do you know what this is?
No. Ender's Game. I don't know.
Dharma Initiative.
Oh, Dharma? Yeah, that's Lost.
Lost.
Yeah. Sorry. So I wanted to make sure that, you know, I'm pretty savvy culturally and, you know, with movies and things.
Yeah,
kind of
okay.
like, yeah, I mean, yeah, we're great. Like I love Spaceballs and so I love the sci-fi scene, right?
Yeah.
So I've got my own movie shirt on today too.
Wow. This is exciting. What? We're going to have the happiest Christmas.
That's right. So, of course, one of the greatest movies of all time is National Lampoon's
It is.
Christmas Vacation. So I think if we took a poll amongst listeners, like this one would win hands down as the best movie out there, right?
Yeah, but however, there was a Christmas where you came not dressed up as someone from National Lampoon's. You came dressed up as someone from the Christmas Story.
And top two.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't.
You were the bunny.
I was the bunny.
Okay, if we can impose that into the video right now, that would be great when everybody sees this. Aaron as the bunny.
I'm game for that.
The pink bunny.
Christmas Story is an amazing one. Christmas Vacation. Anyways, yeah, we could go on and on about movies, but let's talk about tariffs.
So, you know, I've been looking for a new vehicle at some point, and I've been thinking about getting, ordering something from Honda, but I'm totally okay with importing it from Japan and paying the tariffs on it. But you know why I'm just totally fine with this?
Why is that?
It's my civic duty.
All right. Man, we're getting. I mean, this is like extra credit on the jokes and the shirts and everything.
Yes.
Like we are talking about nothing productive right now.
What do you stress out about more for a podcast? The jokes or the top? You know, the actual topic.
That's a good point. Sometimes the jokes are rough.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, you've had some pretty bad ones.
Well, that's kind of the point, right? Bad dad jokes, right?
All right. Okay, so
I'll take that as a compliment.
Give me a nutshell. Let's get started. Aaron, what is a tariff?
All right. Tariffs have been around forever. And it's really when goods are imported into a country from another country, it's a type of tax that's imposed on it, right?
Yeah.
And that's in a nutshell, that's what it is. And usually, like in our world, you've got we do taxes, duties, fees.
Yeah.
Tariffs kind of encompass a number of things within that, but duty is probably the most common term that would relate with.
I think so, especially when it's easy to confuse taxes, and you're thinking about your taxes that you're paying, sales tax, use tax, and using the word duty kind of it is, I think, the most common way to separate what's taxes on an import, because you do get taxes on an import that are familiar to you.
Yep.
Like the sales tax.
But
the duty is a different type of tax, in which we, again, like you said, we don't usually kind of fit in with a tariff. So,
and this has been a really hot topic.
It has,
because we just got done with the presidential elections in the U.S. and the U.S. is a massive player in the global market. And one of what's been Trump's talking point on tariffs going into this election.
He's going to raise tariffs.
Yeah, which is going to have not just an impact on the U.S. market. It's going to be
and if he doesn't raise the tariffs, he's using them as a tool to drive different behaviors.
Yep.
And I think everyone thinks he's just crazy enough to maybe do something. So it should be interesting.
That's kind of Yep.
Now, talk to me a little bit about how tariffs work.
Yeah. So really, it's going to increase the cost of goods that are being imported into the U.S. So
Okay.
you're adding cost to it. Now,
So you have a container of goods coming in, and if it's zero tariffs, then you just pay for the product. But if you have to pay the tariffs, it's just increasing your price to buy all
like
those
the
goods.
total cost of the goods once they
Yep.
finally get across the border
Yep.
and into the country are now more expensive than they were before they crossed the border.
Doesn't matter if it's for resale or if it's just for personal use. If you're just importing it for yourself, actually go to our de minimis episode if you want to avoid some tariffs.
This is true.
The four of them.
Yeah, and so it really just increases the cost of goods, and you think, why? Why would someone want to do that? And we'll talk a little bit about some of the types of tariffs that are out there, but there's a few different reasons why a country would want to put tariffs on. Let's talk. Number one, they want to make some money, right? It's a way of generating revenue for the government of the importing country. There's also, you talked about leverage and stuff. There's political things that can happen as far as leverage in trade agreements and things like that. That could be used, and also to retaliate against, let's say, dumping. Dumping's this term that's used to describe a country selling something at an unreasonably low price into another country to maybe try to wipe out a market or gain an unfair
Like
advantage
steel,
somehow.
which was the big one with
Yeah.
China, right?
Yeah. And so it's a way to level the playing field again on the prices.
So they'll just throw an anti-dumping duty would just be a large increase on top of the existing duty amount, or does it replace the duty amount? Is it like, hey, if duty is 6%, standard 6%, and there's an anti-dumping duty of 20%, what's the total duty?
Okay, give me my percentages again.
20 and 6.
Yeah,
6 is the standard.
Yeah, so
20 is the dumping.
Yeah, I've seen it both ways.
Okay.
So it can, like for example, the Chinese trade wars. It's an additional duty
It's additional.
on top, right?
Right.
And the anti-dumping can target specific types of goods coming from specific countries. So like maybe the goods coming from China are taxed higher than the goods coming from Canada, for example. But it's a way to try to, these are levers that are pulled to level the playing field or to protect a domestic industry so it doesn't get wiped out by unreasonably low price goods coming in. And so that's, like, in a nutshell, those are some of the political and economic reasons.
Let's go to the calculations. Like, how are they calculated? What type of formulas are, what are the types?
Most common is going to be what's called ad valorem.
That's a big word.
Big word. It's actually got a hyphen in it too, so it makes it even way bigger. So
in my notes, you didn't put a hyphen, but that's okay.
Okay, maybe it doesn't have a hyphen. I don't know. In my head, it has a hyphen. So no, but that's just percentage of the value. Like, so it works like a tax, right? Like it's you got a $100 item, you throw 10% duty on it. Now it's it's $110.
So
is what it costs to get it in the country.
If for the U.S., if it's a $100 item and you have 10% duty, it would be,
the duty would be $10.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What if it was going to Europe? Would it be different if it was a 10% duty?
No.
What about the shipping?
That's where it would be different, is the value that they're placed on. Now that's actually a really interesting conversation to have too. So when it is an ad valorem based duty, deciding what value you actually apply that percentage to is different by country.
So if the U.S. had a 10% duty and Europe's had, let's say, a 10% duty, their duty's actually a higher duty rate because of the way they calculate.
Absolutely.
And I think that's important to keep in mind when you're thinking about tariffs, you're trying to do comparisons. A lot of it has to do with the calculations and all of that. And as you were talking about, like, the leverage and things, that there can be a point of diminishing returns with tariffs, right? I don't know. I look at some of these countries like Brazil, and I'm like, I think you're hurting your economy more than helping when you have such higher tariffs than some of the other countries.
So you bring up Brazil. An interesting example with Brazil. They put a massive tariff on electronic goods, things like iPads.
Yeah.
And do you know what effect it had? It made Apple put a manufacturing plant in Brazil.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean...
So they though iPads are going to be more expensive in Brazil, which they are, by the way, which is why, people travel to the U.S., they buy an iPad, and they travel back. In fact, they can probably sometimes save money by doing a trip to get some of their stuff they want. Now, they don't declare it, and declare your stuff. But yeah.
Yep.
It drives behavior, right?
It does. It absolutely does. So yeah, that's...
I mean, we heard about this recently with China. They were going to build, I think it was a manufacturing plant in Mexico, and they were in the midst of building it. And right before the election, they just stopped. I think figuring Trump was going to win.
Yep. Well, and that's tied in probably with de minimis. And
Yeah.
de minimis and tariffs go hand in hand, because de minimis is just a definition of what shipments don't get the tariff.
Don't get a tariff, correct?
Right. So they're so ad valorem tariffs, percentage of the value, but what is the value depends on the country.
All right.
Most countries in the world actually bring in the cost of shipping and insurance and add that to the cost of the product, because they figure the cost to get the goods to the country is really what the value is, not just what the goods are.
Right. That fair. Yes. So, okay, you brought up Brazil as an example. Any other countries that have interesting tariffs out there that are just could be worth mentioning? Just I love entertainment. Just thinking about things that are just.
So let's talk through some examples. And in fact, let's talk about one other thing. There is a percentage based, but there's also a whole bunch of other stuff. This is where it gets interesting. That it's kind of boring to say it's based on the percentage.
Oh
of
yeah,
value.
we forgot a different type.
There's a specific type of tariffs which are.
When you say specific type, is that what it's called? Like it's a
specific tariff. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're talking things that could be quantity based, could be weight based, could be percentage of alcohol in
so what would be like a quantity base? Let's go through some. Give us examples.
Okay, let's just say if it's $5 on a per car tire coming in.
Okay,
I kind of just made that up, but
let's say alcohol, right? Like what would that be?
Yeah, so some of those could be volume, like actually volume, but some of them are actually the measure of the alcohol content within the bottle. So you actually have a completely unique unit of measure specific to that product that has to be communicated to customs. And then you've got things like another weird one would be bringing watches into the U.S. It's not a watch. It's actually, there's different HS codes for each component of the watch. And so it gets really complicated to assign a value to each of the components of the watch to be able to assign things. I will say one thing that's always been just a crazy example, because we talked about political and economic reasons for tariffs. There's also religious reasons for tariffs. So this one's now done away with as of a year or two ago. But in Saudi Arabia, it used to be books were duty free. There's no tariff on them, unless it was a certain type of book. What types of books do you think have a higher duty rate?
Religious books.
Yeah, but what kind of religious? Some religious books.
The ones that they don't want coming in.
Yeah,
maybe.
So like the Bible,
for
example, is one example,
that
but
makes sense.
That's not the only one. What do you think? You go duty free for maybe the Quran or something like that, right?
Right.
Or just regular books in general were duty free, and then a Bible would be what kind of percentage are you thinking?
I don't know, 100%.
10x that.
Jeez, 1,000%.
Yeah, 999%.
So, hey, look, we'll let you have your Bible, but we're going to take our 10. There's a tithe on this, and it is 90%. Okay.
Yeah, so
100%.
I mean, Japan in the past has done things like a 778% duty to protect their rice, right? So on imported rice, they want to protect their rice farmers, and this is something you see like that's the protectionist mindset is we need to protect our industry, and not let it get wiped out by underpriced foreign goods, and so there's a lot of really unique, interesting stories about tariffs out there.
So let's now I know there's a lot of unique stories, and maybe you have a few that. But what's kind of the history of some of this, right? Like how did the tariffs come about? starting when, and just things like that.
So tariffs in general, and we talked a little bit about this even on the de minimis podcast. I think episode 1, we really kind of went into the history of tariffs in general, because tariffs and de minimis are really coupled together. It goes back centuries, right? But if we go back kind of more recent history in the U.S., there's been some really interesting things in the U.S. As you kind of watch the history of tariffs. So, for example, tariffs were the main form of revenue for the federal government way back in the day. Like there was no income tax or anything until about 100 years ago. So,
and Alexander Hamilton loved tariffs.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You want to keep out foreign competition, right?
Yeah.
We're going to kind of
In fact, people have been talking about him a little bit,
Absolutely.
In his position on tariffs, I think, with the Trump administration.
Yeah, so that goes back to the 1700s. If I look here, McKinley tariff, we're talking 1890. That had mixed results. Short term, it actually helped some of the local industries and manufacturing, helped bolster them. But long-term effects, it had some backlash because it increased the cost on imported goods, and so a lot of consumers were starting to see import.
Or even if it's getting manufactured, it still increases the cost.
Yeah, and right? it actually ended up having massive impact on the election. So it was like, it was a trade-off. Some industries won, but it was a loss politically for them. And then you look at a big one, which is the Smoot-Hawley Act in 1930. This is the Great Depression. The idea was let's increase tariffs to try to protect our industries. And what happened was it actually had the opposite effect. It actually made things worse because you had retaliation from the other countries that raised their tariffs too. And
so now your exports went down.
Yeah, everything just...
So it just...
everything
which is why a trade war is nobody wants a trade war because of that, right?
Yep.
Like you really... you want to use it as a tool possibly to, but like you said, there's just trade-offs.
Yep, absolutely. And so it gets interesting if you look at the history of tariffs. Congress actually, it used to all be in the Congress's power to do this. But if you think of a republic like the U.S., every state kind of has their own agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where lobbying and everything really got its roots, is all the states had their own agenda, their own industries they were trying to protect. And it was kind of manipulating the tariffs, and there was a lot of corruption going on. So ironically, they actually started putting more power into the executive branch for tariffs over time, which means, the current executive branch with Trump actually has more levers they can pull than they could have, say, 100, 200 years ago.
Well, you saw this when in his first term when he raised tariffs to China, and everybody gave him a hard time. But then once Biden went in,
he just left it in.
Just left it in place,
and he could have changed that.
Absolutely.
But it, and there's different ways they can get things in. I think China, he used security as the reason. There's some different acts with that, but this isn't necessarily tariff based, but it's related. But income tax came in play. They brought it in the Civil War, right?
Right.
And then abolished it, and then tried to bring it back in the late 1800s, and then it was deemed unconstitutional. And then it was in 1913 that Congress created, I think, the 16th Amendment. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, 16th Amendment, to then make it constitutional to have income tax. And do you know what the tax rate started out? It was like a few percent, right? Like 3%. It was ridiculously low. But that's where it kind of started making, the revenue for the government started coming less and less from tariffs and more from income
in the
tax.
U.S., we have a history of, because of the tension with states and federal government, during the Revolutionary War, having money to pay for, like, we were dirt poor. Like, the soldiers had no money. Like they weren't getting paid. And it was because the federal government couldn't raise money and the states didn't want to give money. So this has always been a tension in the U.S., just the federal government needing money for protection and other things. And now they need it for, 100 plus agents or whatever, thousands. I think it's 2.3 million federal employees. So it's a lot. And then we'll see what Doge does, because I think
I am actually really curious to see how this is going to be an interesting 4 years.
Malay was here talking about just cutting away from Argentina. We're going to do an episode on Argentina here in the next, I think it's the next episode.
Next one. Yeah, that's the plan.
And he has just, I think he cut 60 or 70% of the federal jobs.
Oh, wow.
It was just it might have actually been a little more, but it was crazy. Okay. So e-commerce, right?
Yes.
This is a Decoding E-commerce podcast. We talked about de minimis in just the last 4 episodes, but talk about tariffs, e-commerce, and
yeah, I think I'd like to break this into, so how does, if Trump comes in and increases tariffs, right? I think there's a lot of political arguments that we're hearing on both sides of whether or not that's a good or bad idea. I don't want to get into that. I just want to talk brass tacks. What happens in e-commerce? How could this affect e-commerce sellers? And you have to break that into two categories. One would be e-commerce sellers outside the U.S. trying to sell directly to U.S. consumers, and the other would be U.S. retailers trying to sell out of the U.S.
Okay, all right, let's go.
Right? Okay,
Yep.
So let's tackle the first one.
The retailers outside the U.S.
Outside the U.S.
Yep.
selling in. It depends on the de minimis.
Yes.
If it changes, or let's say it doesn't change, it's really not going to have much of an impact because the tariffs were being bypassed anyways, right? So if nothing changes on de minimis, even if they raise the tariffs,
They won't do anything.
it won't do anything unless you have shipments over $800.
Right.
Other than that, whatever. But that's actually going to exacerbate the loopholes and the desire to leverage the loopholes we talked about in that de minimis podcast. So
why would you have an e-commerce fulfillment center in the U.S. unless you manufactured it in the U.S.?
All of a sudden,
They're just lining the borders of
they're
Mexico.
just lining the borders. Exactly. Now, if the de minimis comes down along with the tariffs going up, you got like this double whammy going from 0 to 100. Like we're talking a massive disruption.
It would be.
Because here's American consumers. We don't even know that it's coming from outside the U.S. We just order something and it shows up on our doorstep. That's it. Can you imagine?
I can't wait to watch the TikToks when people start getting a duty and tax bill from. It's like, what is this? And then all the Canadians are going to make fun of the Americans and all the Europeans, everybody else. That it's like you guys never, you don't know.
We're completely.
We've been
ignorant.
dealing with this.
We
forever.
are completely ignorant.
Explaining what we do as a company to anyone, they're just like. They hear international, they think it's sexy.
Yeah.
But they don't understand the problem that's really that is out there in e-commerce because it's mostly an outside the US problem.
Yep. So yeah, you talk about starting to charge them something and having it being a lot more than it normally would have been. And so they're going to be getting sticker shock over and over and over again. So it's going to educate the American public very quickly, and it will impact business selling into the US.
And you were talking about sellers outside the US. A lot of these are US sellers importing directly from outside the US, right?
Absolutely.
Like we were saying, coming directly from China. But it's the same concept. The US consumer is going to get hit if the de minimis changes or something else.
Yeah, and if you're in that boat, all of a sudden, if the de minimis is lowered, you're going to start thinking, well, maybe I'll just, instead of fulfilling directly from China, I might be bringing it into the U.S. because I'm not getting any advantages.
Okay, so how else does this impact the U.S. merchants that are selling? Not, we talked about the import side that it impacts them. We talked about the import side, how it impacts merchants that are outside the U.S. Does this impact the U.S. merchants in any other?
Absolutely. So if you're bringing goods into the U.S., let's say you bring them into your warehouse for your business, right?
Yeah.
Anything you bring in is now going to be more expensive if it's got higher tariffs on it. So the inventory you're putting in is going to be more expensive, and you've got to pass the cost of those goods on to all of your domestic U.S. sales, right?
Yep.
That's a cost that you're going to fill. Now, when you go to sell internationally, there is a way to get that tariff back, though, when you're re-exporting the goods back out.
A drawback.
Yep.
Yeah. That's easy.
You're going to actually want to pay very close attention to that. It's not easy per se, but there's companies that specialize in it. So you just, if these tariffs go up, you start seeing an increase in those costs. All of a sudden, partnering with a duty drawback company to help you reclaim the tariff that you paid on any imports, you can reclaim those if you re-export it back out of the country. Yeah. And so you're going to want to start paying more attention to that.
We should do an entire episode on duty drawback. I think we know some people.
Yep,
might be a good one to bring in because there's. I was obviously joking as you called me out. It is not necessarily easy, but it's doable. Mm-hmm. And if you have all the right data and things are streamlined, I mean, it can it can become fairly easy.
I mean, really,
But a duty drawback company's taking usually like what, 20% cut? Or?
I was actually just talking to one the other day, and yeah, it's coming down. At one point in time, years ago, it was like they take like 50-50.
It was
now
nuts.
it's much more reasonable.
Yeah.
Like 10-20%.
Yeah.
is
They're just
probably
arbitraging the, hey, you're not going to get this money back anyway. I'll just give you 50, let's just split it 50-50. That's how the pricing started, I think.
Mhm.
But no, that's interesting. So, we'll see what happens here in the coming months and years. And I have a feeling we're going to be doing more podcasts on tariffs and impacts on e-commerce and changes and what's happening in the news and everything else. Any parting thoughts on tariffs as we finish up the podcast?
No, I just think they're terrific.
Okay. All right. It's over. Podcast ended. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.